Thank you. We'll now take questions from our judges.
Well done. Congratulations. Just to kind of start us out, can you explain to me what the Federal Reserve is, how it's structured, and kind of how it works?
So the Federal Reserve is Central Bank of America. It's set up so that it's somewhat decentralized, that it has various Federal Reserve banks in major cities across the United States, and they all meet for Federal Open Market Committee once in a while, and the chair of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, the president, will announce what policies they're going to continue and what policies they're going to drop.
And so your contention, let me see if I get this correctly, is your contention of this paper is that inflation's bad,
Yes.
particularly inflation, which you define as a rise in money supply.
Yes.
And the rise in money supply in our current system is basically happening because of a thing called quantitative easing.
Quantitative easing is the current tool because of interest rates have dropped to zero. Yes, that's true.
So
Normally it would be, normally interest rates would be raised or lowered depending on what the Federal Reserve thought was necessary. But they've already lowered it to almost zero. So they're using quantitative easing.
So quantitative easing is a tool to
Yes.
raise the money supply in the
Yes,
United
they
States.
print more money and they buy bonds from banks using that printed money.
Got it. And your contention is this is a harmful thing for us
Yes.
because of the 3 points of it. Basically, it discourages savings, it promotes deficit spending, and it reduces or destabilizes our currency as the world reserve currency is.
You use the example of Germany after World War I. Can you kind of draw out that parallel? In what ways? I mean, it's a very traumatic example. Wheelbarrows full of paper. And in what ways do you see that being a similar situation, and in what ways is it different? Just so that we're clear that are we heading that direction? Because it's a very different system.
Well, we don't actually print our money anymore. There's no increase in printing money out there. It's merely electronic, so there probably won't be wheelbarrows anytime soon. Also, Germany wanted to inflate its economy because it just had massive somewhat economic damage caused by the war, and they wanted full employment, excuse me. And so they started printing because they believed if you print more money, there would be more economic activity. This is similar to our case as we're coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan, but we are not yet at the point of hyperinflation because at this time, America is a reserve currency, and Germany was not. So they did not have that shield guarding them at that moment.
So Caleb, on the Federal Reserve buying bonds for QE, they're buying U.S. government bonds, is that correct?
No, they're buying bonds from the banking system, I believe.
So if the banks are selling U.S. government bonds, that's funding the U.S. government in a way, perhaps,
Yes.
right? So then, that's what we've noticed then is that we have these larger and larger deficits that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the things that we might see that they might not be able to fund anymore as far as the spending goes because there's all these obligations the government has?
Well, most likely, the thing that's growing most rapidly is Social Security and welfare like that. That is going to grow rapidly as all the baby boomers here and elsewhere retire and start collecting. That's probably the most likely to be defunded. However, it's highly political, so I doubt that. But at some point, we're going to have to start doing something. We started with sequestration, but that's not really a cut it's not a cut of the growth. It's a cut in the increase of government spending. So we need something. We need to start drastically cutting our obligations, and I'm not exactly sure where that will come from.
Caleb, have we passed the point of no return? Is there any hope?
If we stop inflation now, there will probably be a mild recession. when inflation is cut, expectations are dashed, and businesses that had expected people to increase their spending have hired people on that expectation. So when inflation is stopped, that expectation is shown to be false. So there will probably be some form of mild recession. However, especially with our reserve currency status, if we stop now, it will be much easier to get out of, and I don't believe we're at the point of no return.
Caleb, have you found anyone in the political sphere that would echo your opinion? Is there anything out there has anyone proposed a similar, or recognized the same problem and proposed a solution?
Not many people have. One would be Ron Paul, obviously, because he was very libertarian. He wanted to end Fed entirely. I don't necessarily want to do that, but he would definitely support my stopping of inflation. Many politicians don't actually, they follow Keynesian economics, which would support monetary stimulus, because it makes their job that much easier for them, because if they're spending more money, it's always good for politicians to be spending more money. So not that many politicians actually support my position. There's this cool economics called Austrian economics, and they would support my opinion, but it's hard to find a politician who wants to cut spending, but also stop growing spending entirely, because it would not be good for their constituents if they're the only one doing that.
Just clarification, could you explain when you say Keynesian? What you mean?
Keynesian economics is the economics that came about after the Great Depression. It believes that in bad times you stimulate the economy with more government spending and you add more money to the money supply over time. So that would be Keynesian economics.
Can I talk about your point on savings?
Yes.
You said that there's a 96% drop since of the value of the dollar since 1913.
Yes.
And your claim is that interest rates, if we stop inflating, it will promote saving.
Mm-hmm.
And people will be savers again, and we won't be in deficit spending debt. Can we really tie that shift and that change from savings and having a culture of savings to not encouraging it? Can we tie that to inflation? Could we say that's actually a cultural shift, not because of monetary policy?
It's not necessarily like an either or. It's kind of a both, but inflation devalues the money over time. So if interest rates for savings don't keep up with inflation, there's no real economic reason for saving. You should spend your money now when you can get things that are actually worth more money than saving for the next week or the next year or whatever.
So exactly how would we just stop inflation?
One drastic option that I don't think is quite reasonable is to abolish the Federal Reserve. I don't support that necessarily because I believe that will take a cultural shift to do that. The option that I believe would work is to the Federal Reserve to stop manipulating interest rates and stop quantitative easing in the near term.
Caleb, from your studies of the U.S. system, how does that parallel to Japan, for example, where they've been doing a lot of money spending for a number of years and haven't really grown that much?
Oh, what was that last point?
Japan, they've been targeting an inflation rate kind of like you said the Fed does, 3%. Is there a lesson that we've learned from Japan when they're trying to inflate their money supply?
There's different people have different opinions on the lessons we learn. It's almost people want to believe what they believe, and it's hard for especially economists to change their opinion because it's more of a social science than a hard science. So you give them a piece of evidence like Japan, and they say there are mitigating factors of X, Y, and Z. So I would say some people, the Keynesians, ones who want to increase the monetary value, say the unemployment and the problems there could have been worse. And the Austrians and people who want to not mess with the money supply would say it's not getting better because of added money.
Caleb, you said that in some ways inflation could even be viewed as a national security issue.
Yes.
That seems like it takes some extrapolation. If you were to ask the common everyday person on the street, they would not identify inflation as their biggest threat. How would you go about presenting that without it seeming as if it's just a focus group kind of issue?
Yeah. Well, it encourages deficit spending, which has been said, I believe the Pentagon, that deficit spending is the biggest national security issue. It also, if we don't have reserve currency status, which will be caused by inflation at some point, if we lose reserve currency status. If that happens, we could lose influence across the world in our economic power and other ways too. So it's more of I would say it's more of a chain than, because there's inflation, we have national security issue. The effects of inflation are national security issues.
Could you talk to me a little bit more about this idea of the U.S. losing global status or reserve currency status? What would that look like?
Currently,
the second part is, you talked about the IMF having a new currency, a basket of global currencies. Can you tell me what the latest is on that?
So currently most countries use the US dollar for trade, and Arab countries use it for oil, which is a big deal because oil is a large part of the modern economy. What was your second part of your question?
So what would that look like to lose currency, reserves currency status? What would that look like?
What would happen is, as I stated, Forbes, as it happened slowly, it might not be as dramatic, but what most likely will happen is at some point there will be a break in the dam, and people will rapidly shift from the American dollar away. And when that happens, we lose. We can't inflate our sovereign debt anymore because it won't necessarily be denominated in dollars. Our debt that we own, we can't devalue that money, and also many people would just stop using it, which means there's only a few people that would accept it, which means we would have to trade to another currency. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, is currently possibly working on making a basket of currencies, including the Chinese currency and possibly the Japanese and many other non-American currencies, into a basket of a reserve currency for the world.
On the international scale, I know Japan was mentioned, but how does the U.S. compare? We talk about losing status, but is it, in our losing status, is it in the face of a country that is on the rise and going to surpass us, or is everybody in the same boat?
Well, most countries are in the same boat. Basically, all the currencies are trying to devalue their currencies because they believe it helps unemployment, and which is a rather big issue at the time. The two big options that are possible for a global currency are the euro and the Chinese currency. I think it's either renminbi or the yuan. I think they're somewhat confusing, but the Chinese currency probably won't work because it's very closed, and there are lots of controls over where that money can flow to. And the European Union's currency, the euro, is not likely to be used because it's going to be viewed as a political tool for some of the weaker nations, and also the European Union isn't as strong as a federal unit as America right now. So it's possible that we could be taken over, but at this point, you would need other currency out there.
So if the Federal Reserve stops manipulating interest rates, are you proposing that no one monitor the money supply?
They would still have charge of money supply. There's currently no other unit that controls the money supply other than the Treasury, which actually would print it, which is actually kind of misleading because we don't actually print our money when we wish to increase the currency. We add a couple bytes to a spreadsheet somewhere. Sorry, I forgot your question.
is so I guess I'm confused. What's the difference between not manipulating interest rates, but also having control over the money supply?
Interest rates encourage or discourage people from taking out loans. If there's a 10% interest rate on a car that I want to get, I am less likely to buy a car that has 10% interest rate than a couple of years later when there's a 2% interest rate or a very small percent interest rate per year. Increasing the money supply is viewed as more dangerous because it can more quickly be hyperinflationary. So central banks are less likely to adapt that until interest rates have dropped to near zero.
Could you explain the connection that, just for clarification, between that is made between inflation and increases in employment? What is the argument there?
The argument is that more money is more economic activity. It also raises the expectations of businesses who think there's more people spending out there. Instead, it's just more money. But to businesses, it appears, more people are buying our stuff because there's more money out there. So they tend to employ more people because they believe there's more money out there.
All right, I think we'll call it a day for Caleb.